Here is the rewritten story. At just 28, he was already a legend in the business world. Donovan Kingsley, founder and CEO of Kingsley Global Holdings, had built a multinational empire spanning real estate, technology investments, oil logistics, and luxury hotels across 3 continents. Magazines called him one of Africa's youngest self-made billionaires. People admired him, people feared him, but very few truly knew him. Donovan leaned back in his chair inside the penthouse office at the top of the tallest building on Victoria Island, loosening his tie as he stared thoughtfully at the glittering city below. His office was enormous, filled with modern art worth millions and a rare Italian marble desk surrounded by leather chairs imported from London. Yet despite all the wealth surrounding him, he felt strangely empty. His phone buzzed. The name on the screen was Sophia. A small smile touched his lips as he answered. "Hey," he said. Her cheerful voice flowed through the speaker. "Donovan, are you still at work?" "Yes, just finishing up. You promised you wouldn't work too late today," she teased. "Remember, we're meeting the wedding planner tonight." Donovan chuckled softly. The word wedding still felt new. A couple of years earlier, he had proposed to Sophia during a romantic dinner at a luxury restaurant overlooking the ocean. The ring he gave her had cost more than most people's homes, a flawless diamond. Sophia had cried tears of joy and thrown her arms around him, saying yes immediately. At least that was what Donovan wanted to believe. "Donovan?" Sophia's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Yes, you're quiet." "Just tired," he replied. "Well, hurry home," she said sweetly. "Your fiancée misses you." The call ended a moment later. Donovan slowly placed the phone back on the desk, and his smile faded. Something deep inside him felt uneasy. For weeks now, a quiet voice in his mind had been asking a question he could not ignore. Does Sophia love me or my money? He had spent his entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Investors wanted his approval. Politicians wanted his support. Women wanted his wealth. He had dated many models, socialites, actresses, but every relationship had ended the same way. Once money entered the picture, love disappeared. Sophia had seemed different. She was beautiful, elegant, and confident. When they first met at a charity gala, she hadn't appeared impressed by his wealth at all. Or so he had thought. Donovan stood and walked toward the window. His reflection stared back. Tall, handsome, powerful, and incredibly alone. Behind him, the office door opened. "Sir?" He turned. Standing there was Marcus, his longtime assistant, and the only employee he trusted completely. Marcus had worked with him for nearly a decade. He was calm, intelligent, and brutally honest when necessary. "Yes?" Donovan asked. Marcus stepped inside, holding a tablet. "The board meeting summary you requested." Donovan accepted it but didn't look. Instead, he studied Marcus thoughtfully. "Let me ask you something," he said suddenly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerous." Donovan chuckled faintly. "Be honest. When am I ever not?" Donovan leaned against the desk. "Do you think Sophia loves me?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He chose his words carefully. "That's a complicated question," he said finally. Donovan crossed his arms. "Try." Marcus sighed. "Sir, I've seen many people come into your life. Most of them liked your lifestyle more than they liked you." Donovan's expression hardened slightly. "And Sophia?" Marcus hesitated. "She enjoys the lifestyle as well." The room fell silent. Donovan already knew that, but hearing it out loud still stung. Marcus continued carefully. "I'm not saying she doesn't love you, but—" Donovan pressed. "But you have never given anyone the chance to love you without your money." Donovan frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus placed the tablet on the desk. "Every woman who meets you already knows who you are. They know you're rich. They know you're powerful." He looked directly at Donovan. "So how would you ever know if they love you or the billionaire?" Donovan stared at him. That question echoed loudly in his mind. For the next few minutes, neither man spoke. Finally, Donovan walked back to his chair and sat down slowly. "What if," he said quietly, "I could remove the money from the equation?" Marcus looked confused. "How?" Donovan leaned forward. "What if Sophia believed I had lost everything?" Marcus blinked. "You mean pretend to be bankrupt?" Donovan shook his head. "Not just bankrupt." His voice grew colder. "Helpless." Marcus's eyes narrowed. I don't like where this is going. Donovan stood again and began pacing. What if I had an accident? Marcus's expression changed instantly. No. Just listen. No, sir, Marcus said firmly. Whatever you're thinking is a bad idea. Donovan ignored him. What if the world believed I was paralyzed? My companies temporarily transferred to trustees, my wealth locked up in legal complications. Marcus stared at him. You want to pretend to be crippled? Yes. Marcus rubbed his forehead. That's insane. Donovan stopped pacing. Is it? Yes, Marcus said bluntly. Donovan walked toward the window again. Think about it, he said quietly. If Sophia truly loves me, she will stay. And if she doesn't, Marcus asked. Donovan's voice turned cold. Then I deserve to know before marrying her. Marcus sighed deeply. Sir, relationships shouldn't be tested like business deals. Donovan turned around slowly. My entire life has been business deals. Marcus had no answer for that. Donovan returned to his desk and sat down. I've already spoken to a private medical consultant, he continued. Marcus's eyes widened. You've planned this already? Yes. How long? Several weeks. Marcus looked stunned. Donovan leaned back. The accident will happen soon. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. You're serious? Completely. The room fell silent again. Finally, Marcus spoke quietly. And what happens after the accident? Donovan's voice was calm. I return home in a wheelchair, and we see who Sophia really is. Marcus shook his head slowly. This could destroy your relationship. Donovan's expression was unreadable. Then it was never real to begin with. Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. I suppose there's no changing your mind? No. Marcus nodded reluctantly. Then I'll help manage the business side while the world thinks you're incapacitated. Donovan gave a small smile. That's why you're the only person I trust. Marcus picked up the tablet and walked toward the door, but before leaving, he paused. One more thing. Donovan looked up. If Sophia truly loves you... Donovan said nothing. After Marcus left, the office became quiet again. Outside, night had fallen over the city. The lights sparkled like thousands of tiny stars. Donovan stared at them silently. Soon, the world would believe Donovan Kingsley was a crippled man who had lost everything. His businesses would appear frozen. His wealth would seem gone. And the woman who claimed to love him would face a life very different from the one she imagined. Donovan closed his eyes briefly. Part of him hoped the test would fail, because if Sophia truly loved him, then maybe, just maybe, he could finally believe that love was real. But another part of him, the cautious billionaire who had spent years protecting his heart, needed proof. Proof that someone could love him when the money was gone, when the power disappeared, when all that remained was a man sitting in a wheelchair. Let's see the truth, he whispered quietly. And with that decision, the most dangerous test of his life had begun. The rain fell softly against the large glass windows of the Kingsley mansion as the black SUV slowly drove through the tall iron gates. The once lively estate now looked quiet and strangely heavy, as though the entire house had sensed the tragedy that had happened. Inside the car, Donovan Kingsley sat motionless in a wheelchair, staring ahead with an unreadable expression. Several weeks had passed since the accident. At least that was what the world believed. News channels had broadcast the story endlessly. Billionaire Donovan Kingsley paralyzed after horrific crash. Images of the destroyed luxury car had circulated across social media. Commentators debated the future of his companies. Some investors panicked, but Donovan knew the truth. Every single detail had been carefully staged. The accident, the hospital reports, even the emotional press statement released by his company. Everything was part of the test. Beside him in the car sat Sophia. She wore oversized sunglasses even though the sky was dark with rain. Her perfectly styled hair fell over her shoulders, and she kept checking her phone anxiously. Donovan watched her quietly. In the hospital, Sophia had been perfect. She had cried at his bedside. She had held his hand and whispered comforting words. She had even refused to leave his room for days. Anyone watching would have believed she was the most devoted fiancée in the world. But Donovan had noticed something else, something small, something subtle. Every time a doctor entered the room, Sophia would ask the same question, not about his pain, not about his recovery, but about how permanent the paralysis was. How long will this condition last? She asked once. Another time, she whispered to a nurse, are there any expensive treatments? Her tone always carried something strange. Concern, yes, but also calculation. The car finally stopped. The driver quickly got out and opened the door. "Sir, we're home." Donovan nodded. The driver carefully helped him move into the wheelchair before rolling him toward the mansion entrance. The large double doors opened slowly. Inside, the once vibrant house felt unusually empty. Most of the staff had been dismissed after the accident. Donovan had announced that the financial pressure from medical treatments and frozen assets forced him to reduce expenses. Only a few essential workers remained. Sophia stepped into the house behind him and looked around. She sighed loudly. "This place feels so depressing now." Donovan said nothing. The driver rolled him into the living room. The massive chandelier above them sparkled faintly, but the atmosphere was heavy. Sophia walked past Donovan and dropped her handbag onto the couch. "I'm exhausted," she said dramatically. Donovan looked at her calmly. "You've barely done anything today." Sophia frowned slightly. "I spent the entire morning talking to the wedding planner." Donovan studied her face. "About the wedding." She shrugged. "Well, I had to cancel most of the plans." Donovan felt a quiet sting in his chest. "Because of me." Sophia turned toward him. "Well, Donovan, things are different now." She crossed her arms. "You can't walk." The words hung in the air like cold metal. Donovan forced a faint smile. "I noticed." Sophia sighed again and sat on the couch. "I'm just saying the big beach wedding doesn't really make sense anymore." "What kind of wedding does make sense?" Donovan asked calmly. Sophia hesitated. "I don't know yet." Her voice lacked the excitement she once had when discussing their future. Donovan noticed. He noticed everything. For the rest of the afternoon, Sophia stayed glued to her phone, scrolling endlessly through social media while Donovan remained in the wheelchair nearby. Not once did she ask if he needed anything. Not once did she offer to help him move. Eventually, Donovan spoke quietly. "Sophia?" "Yes?" "I'm hungry." She looked up briefly. "Oh." There was a pause, then she called toward the hallway. "Hello? Is anyone here?" A few seconds later, a young woman appeared. She wore a simple uniform and looked slightly nervous. "Good afternoon, ma'am," she said politely. Sophia waved her hand dismissively. "Good, you're here." She pointed toward Donovan. "Prepare food for him." The young woman nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Donovan looked at her carefully. He had never seen her before. "Who is she?" he asked. Sophia replied casually. "Oh, right. I hired a new maid recently." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "You didn't tell me." Sophia shrugged. "Well, someone has to help around here." She glanced at Donovan briefly. "And someone has to help take care of you." The words were sharp. The young maid looked uncomfortable. Donovan remained silent. Sophia stood up and grabbed her handbag again. "I'm going out for a while." Donovan looked surprised. "Where?" "Just meeting friends." "You just got home." "So?" She snapped slightly. Donovan stared at her. "Sophia, I just came home from the hospital." She sighed loudly. "And what exactly do you want me to do? Sit here and watch you all day?" The words struck harder than she realized. Donovan said nothing. Sophia rolled her eyes. "I'll be back later." A moment later, the front door slammed shut. The house fell silent. Donovan sat alone in the middle of the living room. The new maid stood awkwardly nearby. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she stepped forward slowly. "Sir." Donovan looked up. Her voice was soft. "Would you like rice and chicken?" Donovan studied her face. She looked about 25, with kind eyes and a calm expression. "Yes," he said quietly. "Thank you." She nodded gently. "I'll prepare it right away." As she walked toward the kitchen, Donovan leaned back in the wheelchair. His chest felt strangely heavy. This was only the first day at home, and already Sophia sounded tired of him. 2 hours later, the maid returned with a tray. The smell of fresh food filled the room. She carefully placed the tray on the table beside him. "Here you go, sir." Donovan looked at the plate. Rice, grilled chicken, steamed vegetables. It looked simple but well prepared. "Thank you," he said. The maid hesitated. "Would you like help eating?" Donovan looked at her. The test required him to act fully dependent. He sighed softly. "Yes." She gently picked up the spoon and began feeding him slowly. Unlike Sophia, she didn't rush. She didn't sigh. She didn't look irritated. Instead, she spoke calmly. "My name is Lila, sir." Donovan nodded. "Donovan." She smiled slightly. "I know." They both laughed quietly. After a moment, Lila spoke again. I'm sorry about your accident. Donovan watched her expression. There was no curiosity in her eyes, no judgment, only genuine sympathy. Thank you, he said softly. You must have been very strong before it happened. Donovan raised an eyebrow. Why do you say that? Lila continued feeding him. Because even now you still look strong. Donovan was surprised. Strong, she nodded. Yes. She pointed gently toward his eyes. Your eyes still look like someone who hasn't given up. Donovan felt something warm in his chest. It had been weeks since anyone spoke to him like that. Not like a burden, not like a broken man, but like someone still worthy of respect. When the meal ended, Lila carefully cleaned the tray. Do you need anything else, sir? Donovan shook his head slowly. No, she smiled. Then I'll finish cleaning the kitchen. Before she walked away, Donovan said quietly, Lila. She turned. Yes, sir. Thank you. She looked slightly surprised. Then she nodded gently. You're welcome. As she disappeared into the hallway, Donovan sat silently in the living room. Outside, the rain had stopped, but inside the house, something had quietly begun to change. Sophia had once filled this mansion with laughter and excitement. Now her presence felt distant, cold, and strangely impatient. But the quiet maid, who had arrived only recently, had already shown more kindness in a single afternoon than Sophia had since the accident. Donovan stared at the empty doorway where Lila had disappeared. The test had only just begun, but already he could feel the first cracks forming in the love he once believed in. Morning sunlight poured gently through the tall windows of the Kingsley mansion, casting soft golden beams across the polished marble floors. The house was unusually quiet. Donovan Kingsley had always been an early riser. Even during the busiest years of building his empire, his mind had always been sharpest at dawn. But now, sitting in the wheelchair beside the wide bedroom window, he had been awake since before sunrise. The silence of the house felt strange. Once, this mansion had been full of life. Staff members moved constantly through the hallways. Chefs prepared elaborate breakfasts. Assistants arrived early to discuss the day's meetings. Now everything had changed. The once bustling estate had become quiet and nearly empty, and Donovan was supposed to be a man who had lost almost everything. He stared outside at the gardens. Tall palm trees swayed gently in the morning breeze. The fountain in the center of the courtyard continued its steady rhythm. Donovan leaned back slightly in the wheelchair. The test had been underway for several days now, for days since he had returned home pretending to be paralyzed. For days since Sophia had begun slowly revealing a side of herself Donovan had never truly seen before. The hospital version of Sophia, the caring fiancée who held his hand and cried beside his bed, had begun to disappear. In her place was someone colder, someone impatient, someone who looked at him now not with love, but with frustration. The sound of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. A gentle knock followed. Sir, Donovan turned toward the door. Come in. The door opened slowly, and Lila stepped inside carrying a small tray. She wore the same simple uniform as always, her hair neatly tied back. Despite the early hour, her face looked bright and alert. Good morning, sir, she said with a warm smile. Donovan returned the smile. Good morning, Lila. She walked into the room and placed the tray on the nearby table. I brought breakfast. Donovan looked at the tray. Oatmeal, fresh fruit, tea. It wasn't the extravagant breakfast he used to have every morning prepared by professional chefs, but something about it felt comforting. Lila noticed his expression and laughed softly. I know it's simple, she said, but it's healthy. Donovan chuckled. Simple is fine. She hesitated. Would you like help? Donovan nodded. Yes, please. Lila pulled a chair closer and carefully lifted the bowl. She began feeding him slowly, the same way she had done the day before. There was something incredibly calm about the way she moved. No impatience, no discomfort, just quiet kindness. For a moment, they ate in silence. Then Lila spoke. Did you sleep well? Donovan shrugged slightly. Well enough. She studied his face briefly. You look like someone who stayed awake thinking. Donovan raised an eyebrow. You can tell that. She smiled. My grandmother used to say, the eyes reveal when the mind refuses to rest. Donovan chuckled softly. She sounds wise. She was, Lila said, before she passed. Donovan's smile faded slightly. I'm sorry. Lila nodded gently. It's all right. She lived a long life. She continued feeding him quietly. After a few minutes, Donovan asked, How long have you worked as a maid? Lila paused slightly before answering. About 7 years. Donovan looked surprised. You started very young. I had to, she said simply. What happened? Lila looked down at the bowl briefly before speaking. My parents died when I was 14. Donovan felt a small ache in his chest. Both of them? Yes. She spoke calmly, but her eyes revealed how difficult those memories were. My father was a mechanic. My mother sold food in the market. One year there was a terrible accident on the highway. She stopped for a moment. The bus they were traveling in crashed. Donovan said nothing. Lila continued quietly. My grandmother raised me after that, but she was old and sick. We didn't have much money, so I started working. Did you finish school? Yes. Donovan looked impressed. That must have been difficult. It was, she admitted. But my grandmother always said education was the only thing nobody could steal from you. Donovan leaned back slightly. I like your grandmother. Lila smiled. She would have liked you too. Donovan laughed. I doubt that. Why? Because she would probably say I made too much money. Lila laughed softly. That's possible. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Lila suddenly looked embarrassed. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. For what? I'm talking too much. Donovan shook his head. I don't mind. She seemed relieved. Most employers don't like maids talking so much. Donovan raised an eyebrow. You can talk as much as you like. Lila smiled again and continued feeding him. But then Donovan noticed something. You didn't ask about the accident. Lila looked slightly confused. What do you mean? Everyone asks. What happened? Was it painful? Will I ever walk again? Lila thought for a moment. Then she shrugged. I assumed you were probably tired of answering those questions. Donovan stared at her. That's true. So I didn't ask. Her voice was simple, natural. Donovan felt something unexpected inside him. Respect. In all the conversations he had since the accident, people either pitied him or were curious about the details. Lila had done neither. She simply treated him like a person, not a tragedy, not a story, just a man eating breakfast. After finishing the meal, she cleaned the tray carefully. As she stood to leave, Donovan spoke again. Lila, she turned. Yes, sir. Why are you kind to me? The question surprised her. What do you mean? Donovan gestured toward the wheelchair. Most people feel uncomfortable around someone like me. Lila looked confused. Someone like you? The word sounded harsh in the quiet room. Lila's expression changed instantly. No. Her voice was firm. You're not a... Donovan raised an eyebrow. Really? You're someone who had an accident. That's different. Donovan studied her face. What if I never walk again? Lila thought for a moment. Then you'll sit. Donovan blinked. That's it. She nodded calmly. Life doesn't end because one thing changes. Her answer surprised him. Donovan had expected sympathy, maybe even pity, but Lila had given him something else entirely. Perspective. She picked up the tray and walked toward the door, but before leaving, she paused. You still have your mind, she said, and your heart. She looked directly at him. Those matter more than legs. Then she left the room. Donovan sat in silence. Her words echoed in his mind long after she was gone. For years, he had surrounded himself with powerful people, executives, investors, politicians, brilliant people, ambitious people. But somehow this quiet maid with a simple life had just spoken the wisest words he had heard in a long time. He slowly turned his wheelchair toward the window again. Outside, the sun had risen higher, filling the gardens with light. But inside Donovan's heart, something unexpected had begun to grow. Not attraction, not yet, but something deeper. Admiration, respect, and a quiet curiosity about the woman who had entered his life so quietly. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the house, Sophia slept peacefully in the master bedroom, unaware that her behavior over the past few days had already begun to change everything. The test Donovan had created was revealing the truth. And slowly, very slowly, the maid who spoke kindly to a crippled billionaire was becoming the most important person in his world. The days following Donovan's return from the hospital passed slowly. Inside the Kingsley mansion, the atmosphere had changed completely. Once, laughter had filled the halls. Once, music had played as Sophia moved around the house excitedly, discussing wedding decorations and honeymoon destinations. But now, the mansion felt strangely cold. Not physically cold, emotionally cold. Donovan noticed the change more and more each day. At first, Sophia still attempted to behave like the caring fiancée she had been at the hospital. She would occasionally ask if he needed something. She would sometimes sit beside him while scrolling through her phone, but the warmth in her voice had faded. The excitement in her eyes was gone, and most of the time she simply avoided being in the same room with him. Donovan noticed everything. He was a businessman who had built billion-dollar deals by studying the smallest details in people's behavior. A raised eyebrow, a hesitation in a voice, a shift in tone, all of those things revealed truth. And Sophia was slowly revealing hers. That evening, a cool breeze drifted through the open balcony doors of the living room. Donovan sat in his wheelchair near the window, quietly watching the sun sink into the distant city skyline. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple. It should have been a peaceful moment, but inside Donovan's chest, a quiet tension was building. Sophia had been acting strangely all day. She had spent hours getting dressed, trying on different outfits, fixing her makeup several times, checking herself in the mirror repeatedly. Donovan had watched silently from the couch. Finally, he asked calmly, "Are you going somewhere?" Sophia barely glanced at him. "Maybe. I might meet some friends." Donovan studied her face. "You seem very dressed up for a casual meeting." Sophia sighed impatiently. "Donovan, not everything I do needs an explanation." Donovan remained silent. The old Sophia would have laughed. She would have come over, kissed his cheek, and said something playful. But this version of Sophia was different. She looked at him now like someone who had become an inconvenience. Eventually, she grabbed her handbag and walked toward the door. "I won't be late," she said casually. Donovan nodded. "Okay." But she didn't leave. Instead, she hesitated near the door, checking her phone again. Then she smiled at the screen. A different smile. A secret smile. Donovan noticed. She quickly slipped the phone into her purse and walked outside. The door closed behind her. The house fell silent. Donovan remained in the living room for several minutes, staring at the door thoughtfully. Something about her behavior had felt strange. He slowly wheeled himself closer to the window and looked outside. Sophia's car had not left. It was still parked near the gate. Donovan frowned slightly. Then he heard something. Laughter. Soft laughter coming from outside the house. Donovan leaned forward slightly. The laughter didn't belong to Sophia alone. There was a man's voice, too. Donovan's eyes narrowed. Slowly, he turned his wheelchair and moved toward the hallway. The mansion was large, but Donovan knew every corner of it. He carefully rolled down the hallway until he reached the entrance area. The front door was slightly open. Through the narrow gap, he could hear their voices clearly. Sophia's voice sounded playful. "You're late," the man laughed. "You missed me?" "Maybe." Donovan's heart beat slowly but steadily. He positioned himself quietly near the wall where they couldn't see him. Then he looked through the small opening. Standing just outside the door was a tall man wearing a stylish black shirt and expensive shoes. He looked confident, relaxed, too relaxed for someone standing at another man's house. Sophia stood in front of him, smiling brightly. Donovan noticed something immediately. It was the same smile she used to give him. The man leaned closer. "You look beautiful tonight." Sophia laughed softly. "You say that every time." "Because it's always true." Donovan felt something sharp inside his chest. Not anger, not yet. Just a deep disappointment slowly forming. Sophia glanced toward the house. "He's inside." The man shrugged. "So?" Sophia lowered her voice slightly. "He can't walk." The words were quiet, but Donovan heard them clearly. The man smirked. "Well, that makes things easier." Sophia laughed again. Then something happened that made Donovan's stomach twist. She stepped closer to the man, much closer, close enough that their bodies almost touched. "You're terrible," she whispered playfully. The man leaned forward. "You like terrible." And then he kissed her right there at the entrance of Donovan's home. Sophia didn't resist. She didn't hesitate. She kissed him back slowly, passionately, like two people who had done this many times before. Donovan felt the air leave his lungs. The test had been running for less than a week. Less than a week. And already his fiancée was kissing another man, but the worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the location. His house. The house where he had proposed to her. The house where they planned to start their life together. Now it had become the place where she openly cheated on him. The kiss lasted several seconds before Sophia pulled away. She laughed softly. "You're crazy." The man grinned. "You love it." Sophia glanced toward the door again. He's probably sleeping. Donovan remained perfectly still. The man shrugged. Even if he's awake, what's he going to do? Sophia smiled slightly. Nothing. The word echoed painfully in Donovan's ears. Nothing. To her, he was now nothing. Just a man sitting in a wheelchair. The man suddenly wrapped his arm around her waist. Come on, he said. Let's have a drink. Sophia hesitated briefly. In the house. Why not? She thought for a moment. Then she shrugged. You're right. And with that, she pushed the door open. Donovan quickly rolled his wheelchair backward into the hallway, making sure they couldn't see him. A moment later, their voices echoed through the living room. Sophia's laughter filled the air. The man's voice followed. Donovan remained hidden in the shadow of the hallway. His mind was calm, too calm. Inside, his heart felt heavy, but his face remained expressionless, because now the test was working perfectly. He slowly wheeled himself forward until he could see the living room. Sophia and the man sat comfortably on the couch. She poured wine into 2 glasses. They clinked their glasses together. To freedom, the man joked. Sophia laughed. Exactly. Donovan stared at them quietly from the hallway. Every second confirmed what he needed to know. Every smile, every touch, every careless word. Finally, the man asked, So, what about the wedding? Sophia rolled her eyes dramatically. What wedding? You're engaged, remember? Sophia took a long sip of wine. That was before the accident. And now, she shrugged. I'm not marrying a... The sentence landed like a hammer. Donovan closed his eyes briefly. The truth was now undeniable. Sophia had never loved him. She had loved the billionaire, the powerful man who could give her luxury. But the moment she believed he had lost everything, her loyalty vanished. Donovan opened his eyes again. In the living room, Sophia leaned toward the man and kissed him again. They laughed together like 2 people celebrating something. Meanwhile, in the hallway, the man they believed powerless sat silently in his wheelchair, watching, learning, and understanding the truth. Because sometimes the most painful discoveries were also the most necessary ones. The morning after Donovan witnessed Sophia kissing another man in front of the house felt strangely quiet. The sun rose slowly over the city, painting the sky with soft shades of gold and orange. Birds chirped in the distance, and the calm breeze moved gently through the tall palm trees surrounding the Kingsley mansion. But inside the house, the atmosphere was heavy. Donovan had not slept. He sat in the living room near the large glass windows, staring out at the garden, while the events of the previous night replayed endlessly in his mind. Sophia's laughter, the stranger's voice, the kiss. Every moment had been burned into his memory. But what surprised Donovan the most was not the betrayal itself. It was how calm he felt. Years of business had taught him to control his emotions. In negotiations worth billions of dollars, anger was a weakness. Emotion clouded judgment. And right now, Donovan needed his mind to remain clear. The test was working. Painful, yes, but necessary. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Lila appeared a moment later, carrying a tray. Good morning, sir, she said gently. Donovan turned his wheelchair slightly and forced a small smile. Good morning, Lila. She walked closer and placed the tray on the table beside him. Breakfast is ready. Donovan looked at the tray. Fried eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and a cup of tea. Lila noticed the tired look on his face. Did you sleep well? She asked. Donovan hesitated. Not really. She frowned slightly. Are you feeling pain? Donovan shook his head. No. Lila studied him for a moment. You look like someone who is carrying heavy thoughts. Donovan gave a faint laugh. You're very observant. Lila smiled softly. My grandmother used to say, the face always reveals what the heart tries to hide. Donovan looked away toward the window. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Lila picked up the spoon and began feeding him carefully. Unlike Sophia, she never rushed through the process. Every movement was patient and gentle. For a moment, they ate in silence. Then Lila spoke again. Sir. Yes. If something is troubling you, you can talk about it. Donovan glanced at her. Why would you think something is troubling me? Lila shrugged lightly. You've been staring outside for a long time. Donovan smiled faintly. Maybe I just enjoy the view. Lila laughed softly. Maybe. But she didn't press further. She simply continued feeding him quietly. Donovan appreciated that. Most people were either too curious or too distant. Lila seemed to understand the balance between caring and respecting someone's privacy. After breakfast, she wiped his hands with a warm cloth. "Would you like to go outside today?" she asked. Donovan shook his head. "No." "All right." She collected the tray and stood up. "I'll finish cleaning the kitchen." Before she left, Donovan said quietly, "Thank you, Lila." She smiled warmly. "You're welcome, sir." As she disappeared down the hallway, Donovan leaned back in the wheelchair again. The peaceful moment didn't last long. About half an hour later, loud music suddenly echoed through the house. Donovan frowned. The sound was coming from the living room speakers. Moments later, Sophia walked down the stairs wearing a tight red dress. She looked glamorous, like someone preparing for a party, not someone living with an injured fiancé. She barely acknowledged Donovan as she walked past him toward the mirror. Donovan watched silently. "You're up early," he said calmly. Sophia rolled her eyes slightly. "I couldn't sleep." She adjusted her hair in the mirror. "Why is the music so loud?" Donovan asked. "I like music in the morning." Donovan didn't argue, but something about her behavior felt different today. More careless, more bold. Then suddenly, the doorbell rang. Sophia's face brightened immediately. She rushed toward the door. Donovan's heart sank slightly. He already knew who it was. The door opened. The same man from the night before walked in confidently. Tall, stylish, smiling like he belonged there. "Good morning," the man said casually. Sophia laughed. "You're early. I couldn't wait to see you." Donovan watched quietly from his wheelchair. Sophia didn't even bother introducing the man. She simply walked over and hugged him right there in the living room, right in front of Donovan. The man glanced briefly toward Donovan. His eyes scanned the wheelchair. Then he smirked slightly. "So this is him?" Sophia shrugged casually. "Yes." Donovan felt the insult like a slap. Not even a name, just him. The man walked closer and sat comfortably on the couch. Sophia sat beside him. "So, what's your name?" the man asked Donovan with a mocking tone. Donovan looked at him calmly. "Donovan." The man nodded slowly. "I'm Damon." He leaned back on the couch like a king visiting a conquered palace. Sophia laughed softly beside him. Damon glanced again at Donovan's wheelchair. "So, the famous billionaire," he said sarcastically. Sophia rolled her eyes. "He used to be." Both of them laughed. The sound echoed painfully in Donovan's ears, but Donovan remained silent. Damon leaned closer to Sophia and whispered something in her ear. She giggled like a teenager. Then Damon turned back toward Donovan. "You know," he said casually, "life is funny." Donovan said nothing. "One day you're rich and powerful," Damon continued, "and the next day you're stuck in a wheelchair." Sophia nodded dramatically. "Exactly." She looked directly at Donovan. "It's depressing." Donovan stared at them quietly. Damon suddenly stood up. "Well, enough sad talk." He grabbed Sophia's hand. "Let's get something to drink." They walked toward the kitchen together, laughing. As they passed Donovan, Damon looked down at him. "Don't worry," he said casually. "We'll try not to make too much noise." Sophia laughed loudly. Donovan felt his hands tighten slightly on the armrest of the wheelchair, but he remained calm because every cruel word only confirmed what he needed to know. A few minutes later, Lila walked into the living room carrying a cleaning basket. She immediately sensed the strange atmosphere. Her eyes moved from Donovan to the empty couch, then toward the kitchen, where laughter echoed loudly. "Sir," she asked quietly, "are you all right?" Donovan forced a small smile. "I'm fine." Lila looked uncertain. Then she noticed Damon and Sophia returning from the kitchen with drinks. Damon had his arm wrapped around Sophia's waist. Lila's eyes widened slightly. She quickly lowered her gaze and continued cleaning. Sophia noticed her. "Lila," she called. "Yes, ma'am." "Bring us some snacks." "Yes, ma'am." Lila walked toward the kitchen. As she passed Donovan, she whispered softly, "Do you need anything?" Donovan shook his head. "No." But Lila's eyes showed concern. She had seen enough to understand what was happening. Back in the living room, Damon sat beside Sophia again. They leaned close together, laughing, whispering, touching each other openly. Sometimes Damon even glanced toward Donovan with a mocking smile, as if daring him to react. But Donovan didn't move. He simply watched. Because the more cruel they became, the clearer the truth became. And the truth was this: Sophia had never loved him. She had loved the billionaire, not the man. and now that she believed the billionaire was gone, her mask had fallen completely. Meanwhile, across the room, Lila returned quietly with a tray of snacks. She placed it gently on the table, but as she walked away, her eyes met Donovan's briefly, and in that silent moment, Donovan saw something Sophia had never shown him: compassion, respect, and quiet understanding. The test was far from over, but one thing had already become painfully clear. The woman he planned to marry was capable of shocking cruelty, and the maid he barely noticed before was becoming the only kind soul left in the house. The Kingsley mansion was unusually quiet that evening. The sun had already disappeared beyond the city skyline, leaving behind a deep orange glow fading slowly into the darkening sky. Outside, the tall palm trees swayed gently in the cool evening breeze. Inside the house, the silence felt heavy. Donovan sat alone in the living room, his wheelchair positioned near the large window that overlooked the garden. The faint sound of crickets drifted through the slightly open balcony door. The mansion that once hosted glamorous parties and business meetings now felt almost empty, but Donovan did not mind the silence. What troubled him was the growing weight inside his chest. Over the past week, Sophia's behavior had changed completely. She no longer pretended to care. She no longer hid her impatience. Damon now visited the house almost every day, and neither of them seemed bothered by Donovan's presence. Sometimes they laughed loudly while sitting just a few feet away from him. Sometimes they whispered to each other and kissed openly in the living room. Sometimes they spoke about Donovan as if he were not even there. To them, he had become invisible, a useless man in a wheelchair. But Donovan remained calm. Every insult, every careless word, every cruel action, all of it was simply evidence. Evidence that his decision to test Sophia had been the right one. Still, there were moments when the betrayal stung more than he expected. Tonight was one of those moments. Donovan stared quietly at the dark garden outside. Then he heard soft footsteps approaching. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Sir?" Lila's gentle voice filled the room. Donovan turned his wheelchair slightly. She stood near the doorway holding a tray. "Dinner is ready," she said with a small smile. Donovan nodded. "Thank you, Lila." She walked toward him and placed the tray carefully on the table. The smell of freshly cooked food filled the room. Rice, grilled chicken, vegetables. Lila noticed Donovan studying the plate. "I hope you like it," she said shyly. "I tried a new recipe." Donovan smiled faintly. "It smells good." Lila hesitated before asking, "Would you like help eating?" Donovan nodded slowly. "Yes, please." She pulled a chair beside him and gently lifted the plate. As she began feeding him, Donovan noticed how careful she was. She always made sure the food wasn't too hot. She waited patiently between each bite. She never rushed. It was such a small act of kindness, but in a house filled with coldness and betrayal, it meant more than she probably realized. For a few minutes, they remained silent. Then Lila spoke quietly. "You've been very quiet today." Donovan gave a small smile. "I'm usually quiet." She shook her head. "Not like this." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "You've been observing me." Lila laughed softly. "Only a little." Donovan leaned back slightly. "And what have you observed?" Lila thought for a moment. "You look sad." Donovan didn't respond immediately. The word lingered in the air. Sad, was that what he felt? Perhaps. But it was more complicated than that. Finally, he sighed softly. "Lila, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you kind to someone like me?" Lila looked confused. "What do you mean?" Donovan gestured toward the wheelchair. "I'm a burden in this house." Her expression changed instantly. "No." Her voice was firm. "You're not a burden." Donovan gave a bitter smile. "Sophia seems to think otherwise." Lila hesitated. She had clearly noticed Sophia's behavior, but she didn't want to speak badly about her employer. "People sometimes behave differently when life changes suddenly," she said carefully. Donovan chuckled quietly. "That's a polite way of saying people reveal their true selves." Lila looked down at the plate for a moment before continuing to feed him. After a few minutes, Donovan spoke again. "Does it make you uncomfortable?" "What?" "Taking care of someone who can't walk?" Lila immediately shook her head. "No." "Why not?" She shrugged slightly. "Because you're still a human being." Donovan looked at her carefully. "Many people don't see it that way." Lila's voice softened. "I do, eh?" The sincerity in her words made Donovan's chest tighten slightly. For days, he had been treated like an inconvenience. But Lila's simple kindness reminded him that dignity still existed. After finishing the meal, she wiped his hands gently with a warm cloth. Then she stood up to take the tray, but Donovan stopped her. "Lila." She turned. "Yes, sir." "Sit for a moment." She looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She hesitated briefly before sitting down in the chair beside him. For a moment, they simply listened to the quiet sounds of the evening. Then Donovan asked, "Do you ever get tired?" Lila smiled faintly. "Of working?" "Yes, sometimes." She leaned back slightly. "But life has never been easy for me." Donovan remembered the story she had shared about losing her parents. "You mentioned your grandmother raised you." Lila nodded. "She did." "What happened to her?" Lila's smile faded slightly. "She passed away a few years ago." Donovan felt a quiet sadness in his chest. "I'm sorry." Lila shrugged gently. "She was old. She had been sick for a long time." Donovan studied her face. "Was she the one who taught you to be kind?" Lila laughed softly. "Yes, she always said something interesting." "What?" Lila's voice became softer. "She said the way people treat those who can do nothing for them reveals their true character." Donovan felt a strange chill because that was exactly what his test was revealing. He looked at Lila carefully. "You believe that?" "Yes." She smiled gently. "That's why I try to treat everyone well." Donovan asked quietly, "Even someone who has lost everything?" Lila looked directly at him. "Especially someone who has lost everything." Her words hit him harder than she could imagine. For the first time since the test began, Donovan felt something warm break through the cold disappointment in his heart. He realized something important in that moment. Sophia had been with him for years, but he had never heard words as sincere as the ones Lila had spoken tonight. He slowly looked away toward the garden again. "Lila?" "Yes." "Have you ever been in love?" The question caught her off guard. Her cheeks turned slightly red. "No." Donovan smiled faintly. "Never." She shook her head. "I've always been too busy trying to survive." Donovan nodded slowly. "That makes sense." Lila glanced at him curiously. "Why did you ask?" Donovan thought for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Because sometimes people confuse love with convenience." Lila tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" Donovan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he simply stared out into the dark garden. Then he spoke softly. "Real love is supposed to stay even when life becomes difficult." Lila nodded slowly. "Yes." She paused before adding, "My grandmother used to say real love is proven during hard times." Donovan looked at her again. "And what if someone fails that test?" Lila thought carefully. Then she replied, "Then it wasn't real love." The words hung quietly between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lila suddenly stood up. "I should finish cleaning the kitchen." Donovan nodded. "All right." She picked up the tray and walked toward the hallway, but before disappearing, she turned back. "Good night, sir." "Good night, Lila." As her footsteps faded into the distance, Donovan leaned back in the wheelchair. His heart felt strangely different tonight. Still heavy with betrayal, but also touched by something unexpected. Hope. Because in a house where cruelty had begun to dominate, one quiet maid had shown him the simple power of kindness, and Donovan was beginning to realize something important. Sometimes the most valuable people in life were the ones the world barely noticed. The night air outside the Kingsley mansion was cool and quiet. Dark clouds had gathered in the sky, and the distant rumble of thunder rolled softly over the city. A light rain had begun to fall, tapping gently against the large windows of the mansion. Inside, the house felt peaceful for the first time in days. Sophia had gone out again earlier that evening. Donovan hadn't even asked where she was going. He already knew the answer. Damon, the man, had become a regular visitor now. Sometimes he arrived in the afternoon, sometimes at night. Sometimes he stayed so long that Donovan wondered if Sophia even remembered she had a fiancé living in the same house. But strangely, Donovan felt less angry about it now. The truth had already revealed itself. Sophia had failed the test, and every new act of cruelty simply confirmed what Donovan already knew. Still, despite the betrayal, something else had begun to grow quietly inside the mansion. Something Donovan had not expected. Peace. And that peace had a name. Lila. Donovan sat in the living room near the window, watching the rain fall across the garden. The soft sound of water hitting the ground created a calm rhythm that filled the quiet house. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax. Then he heard footsteps approaching. Lila appeared in the doorway holding a tray. "Sir," she said gently, "I brought some tea." Donovan turned toward her and smiled faintly. "You seem to know exactly when I need tea." Lila laughed softly. "My grandmother used to say tea solves half of life's problems." Donovan chuckled. "I wish that were true." She placed the tray on the small table beside him. Steam rose gently from the cup. Lila noticed Donovan staring at the rain outside. "It's a peaceful night," she said. "Yeah," Donovan replied quietly. "The rain makes everything feel calmer." Lila nodded. "I like rain." "Why?" "It reminds me of my village." Donovan looked at her curiously. "You grew up in a village?" "Yes." "Where?" "In Anambra State." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "That's far from here." Lila nodded. "Very far." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "But sometimes I still miss it." Donovan leaned back slightly in his wheelchair. "What was it like growing up there?" Lila smiled faintly, as if memories had suddenly come alive in her mind. It was simple. She sat down in the chair across from him. There were farms everywhere. My father worked as a mechanic in the nearby town, but when he came home, he always helped my mother in the small garden behind our house. Donovan listened carefully. "My mother sold vegetables in the local market," Lila continued. "She woke up very early every morning." "What about you?" Donovan asked. "I helped her sometimes, but my favorite place was the river." "The river?" Lila nodded. "There was a small river near our house. My friends and I used to swim there after school." She laughed softly. "We thought the world was so big back then." Donovan smiled. "And now?" Lila looked around the large mansion quietly. "Now the world feels complicated." Donovan understood that feeling very well. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the rain tapping gently against the windows. Then Donovan spoke again. "You told me your parents died when you were 14. Lila nodded slowly. "Yes." Her smile faded. "It happened very suddenly." Donovan noticed her fingers tightening slightly in her lap. The bus they were traveling in lost control on the highway. She continued quietly. "There were many passengers." She paused. "Only a few survived." Donovan felt a heavy sadness in his chest. "That must have been very difficult." Lila nodded. "It was." She looked down at the floor. "For a long time, I felt like my whole world had disappeared." Donovan said nothing. He knew some pains didn't need immediate answers. After a moment, Lila continued, "My grandmother took care of me after that. She sounds like a strong woman." "She was." Lila smiled slightly again. "She had very little money, but she had a big heart." "What did she do?" "She sold roasted corn by the roadside." Donovan looked surprised. "That can't make much money." Lila shook her head. "It didn't, but she always made sure I had food. And school." Donovan asked. Lila nodded proudly. "She insisted that I must continue my education." "What if you refused?" Donovan asked with a teasing smile. Lila laughed softly. "That was not an option." Donovan chuckled. "She sounds strict." "She was," Lila admitted, "but she always said something that stayed with me." "What was it?" Lila's voice became softer. She said, "Kindness is the only wealth poor people can afford to give freely." Donovan felt something stir inside him. Kindness, the one thing Sophia seemed incapable of offering anymore. "My grandmother believed kindness always returned someday," Lila continued. "That's why she never allowed me to hate anyone." Donovan looked at her thoughtfully. "Even after losing your parents?" Lila nodded slowly. "Yes." She glanced toward the rain outside. "For a long time, I was angry at the world." "What changed?" "My grandmother told me something one night." "What?" "She said, pain can either make a person bitter or compassionate." Donovan repeated the words quietly. "Compassionate." Lila nodded. "She told me if I allowed pain to make me bitter, I would lose the good parts of my heart." Donovan looked down at his hands resting on the wheelchair armrest. He wondered what kind of person he would have become if life had tested him the same way. "You must miss her," he said softly. Lila nodded. "Every day." They both sat quietly for a moment. Then Donovan asked something unexpected. "Lila, have you ever been treated badly because you were poor?" She laughed quietly. "Many times. But you still treat people kindly." "Yes." "Why?" Lila looked at him with calm eyes. "Because I know how painful it feels to be treated like nothing." Her words struck Donovan deeply. For the past few weeks, Sophia had begun treating him exactly that way. Like nothing. Like someone who had become useless. But Lila had chosen a different path. Her pain had made her compassionate instead of cruel. Donovan suddenly realized something. Kindness was not something people showed when life was easy. Kindness was something people showed when life was hard. And Lila had faced hardship far greater than most people in the mansion ever could. The rain outside began falling harder now. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Lila stood up slowly. "I should go finish cleaning before the rain gets worse." Donovan nodded. "Thank you for the tea." She smiled. "You're welcome." But before leaving, she hesitated. Then she asked softly, "Sir, can I ask you something?" Donovan raised an eyebrow. "Of course." Lila looked slightly nervous. "Do you ever regret becoming so successful?" The question surprised him. "Why would you ask that?" Lila shrugged gently. "Sometimes people with a lot of money seem very lonely." Donovan thought about the question carefully. Then he answered honestly, "Success didn't make me lonely." "What did?" Donovan looked toward the dark window, not knowing who truly cares about me. Lila seemed to understand immediately. "That must be difficult." "It is." He paused before adding quietly, "That's why people sometimes test those around them." Lila nodded slowly. "That makes sense." But then she said something that made Donovan look at her again. "Tests can reveal truth, but they can also reveal pain." Donovan smiled faintly. "That's the risk." Lila gave him a gentle look. "I hope the truth you discover brings you peace." Donovan watched her walk toward the hallway, and for the first time since the test began, he felt something surprising. Hope. Because while Sophia had shown him the worst side of love, Lila had shown him the purest. And Donovan was beginning to realize that sometimes the person who changes your life forever is the one you least expect. Morning arrived slowly at the Kingsley mansion. The sun rose behind a blanket of soft gray clouds, casting a pale light across the wide gardens and tall palm trees that surrounded the estate. Normally, the mansion would feel calm in the morning hours, but today the atmosphere felt tense. Inside the house, Donovan sat in the living room near the large glass windows, staring out at the quiet garden, but his mind was not on the view. For weeks, he had watched Sophia's behavior grow worse and worse. At first, it had been small things. Her impatience, her cold tone, her sudden lack of concern. Then Damon began visiting. Now Damon no longer bothered to hide his presence. Sometimes he arrived early in the morning. Sometimes he stayed late into the night. And Sophia behaved as though Donovan simply did not exist. Donovan had created this test to reveal the truth, and now the truth had become impossible to ignore. Sophia had failed completely, but Donovan still remained silent. He wanted to see just how far she would go. Across the room, Lila quietly wiped the glass table with a soft cloth. She moved carefully, trying not to disturb Donovan's thoughts, but she could sense the tension in the room. Over the past few weeks, she had noticed everything. Sophia's cruel words, Damon's mocking laughter, the way they behaved as though Donovan was invisible. Lila did not understand how anyone could treat another human being that way. She glanced toward Donovan. He was staring outside again. His face looked calm, but Lila had learned that calm did not always mean peace. "Sir," she said gently. Donovan turned his wheelchair slightly. "Yes, Lila." "I made breakfast. Would you like to eat now?" Donovan nodded slowly. "Yes, thank you." She brought the tray and placed it on the table beside him. Rice and eggs, fresh fruit, tea. Simple but warm. As she began feeding him, Lila spoke softly. "You didn't sleep much last night." Donovan gave a small smile. "You're very observant." Lila shrugged. "It's easy to notice when someone is thinking too much." Donovan looked down at the plate. Sometimes thinking is unavoidable. Lila did not ask further. She simply continued feeding him quietly. Suddenly, loud laughter echoed from upstairs. Lila froze slightly. Donovan's eyes lifted slowly toward the staircase. Footsteps followed. Then Sophia's voice filled the house. "Damon, you're impossible." Lila's face tightened. Moments later, Sophia and Damon walked down the stairs together. Sophia wore a short silk robe. Damon had his arm casually draped around her shoulders. They both stopped when they saw Donovan and Lila in the living room. Damon smirked. "Well, good morning." Sophia barely looked at Donovan. Instead, she walked straight toward the kitchen. "Do we have coffee?" she asked loudly. Lila stood up. "Yes, ma'am, I'll prepare some." Damon sat down on the couch and stretched lazily. He glanced toward Donovan. "You're always in the same place." Donovan said nothing. Damon chuckled. "I guess you don't have many options." Sophia returned a moment later. She sat beside Damon and leaned against him comfortably. Lila walked past them with the coffee tray. As she placed the cups on the table, she could feel the tension building. Damon suddenly wrapped his arm tighter around Sophia's waist. "You look beautiful this morning," he said. Sophia laughed softly. "Stop." Damon leaned closer. "I'm serious." Then he kissed her right there in the middle of the living room, right in front of Donovan. Lila froze. The cloth she was holding slipped slightly from her hands. Her eyes widened with shock. Sophia didn't seem to care. She kissed Damon back openly. When they finally pulled apart, Damon laughed. "Oops." He glanced toward Donovan. "Did we disturb you?" Sophia rolled her eyes. "Relax, he can't do anything." The words landed heavily in the room. Lila felt anger rise inside her chest. She had tried to stay quiet, tried to mind her own business, but what she was seeing now felt deeply wrong. Damon leaned back comfortably. "So, Sophia," he said casually, "when are you finally leaving this place?" Sophia shrugged. "Soon." Damon raised an eyebrow. "What's taking so long?" Sophia glanced toward Donovan. "Legal things." She said the words as if Donovan were an object in the room, not a person. Lila could no longer stay silent. "How can you do this?" she said suddenly. The room went completely quiet. Sophia turned slowly toward her. "What did you say?" Lila stood straight. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't look away. "How can you treat him like this?" Damon laughed loudly. "Oh, look! The maid has an opinion." Sophia's face darkened. "Mind your business," she snapped. Lila shook her head. "He is your fiancé." Sophia stood up abruptly, Lila's eyes filled with emotion. "He is injured. He needs care." Sophia laughed coldly. He's Lila's heart pounded. "That doesn't mean he deserves to be humiliated." Damon stood up now, clearly amused by the argument. "Wow, this is entertaining." Sophia walked closer to Lila. "You're just a maid, Arda," she said sharply. "Know your place." Lila's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't move. "Kindness has no rank," she replied quietly. Sophia scoffed. "Oh, please." She turned back toward Damon. "Let's go upstairs." Damon nodded. "Good idea." But before they moved, Damon leaned toward Donovan and smirked. "You're lucky to have such a loyal maid." Sophia laughed again. "Yes, she cares more about him than I ever did." They both laughed. Then they walked upstairs together, their laughter echoing through the house. Silence returned to the living room. Lila stood frozen in place. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Donovan watched her quietly. Finally, he spoke. "Lila." She turned quickly. "I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have spoken like that." Donovan shook his head slowly. "You were defending someone who couldn't defend himself." Lila looked down. "But it's not my place." Donovan studied her face. "It takes courage to stand up against cruelty." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I just couldn't watch anymore." Donovan felt a deep warmth in his chest. In a house where everyone treated him like nothing, this young woman had risked her job just to defend his dignity. "Lila," he said gently. "Yes." "Thank you." She wiped her eyes quickly. "You don't deserve that kind of treatment." Donovan sighed softly. "No, I don't." But inside his mind, something had finally shifted. Sophia had crossed the final line, the breaking point. She had humiliated him openly, mocked his condition, and now even the staff had been forced to witness her cruelty. Donovan looked toward the staircase where Sophia had disappeared. For weeks he had allowed the test to continue, but now the truth was undeniable. The test was over, and soon, Sophia would learn that the man she believed powerless was still the most powerful person in that house. The Kingsley mansion was unusually quiet that morning. The rain from the previous night had washed the air clean, leaving the gardens outside fresh and bright under the early sunlight. Birds chirped softly among the palm trees, and the fountain in the courtyard sparkled as the light reflected off the flowing water. But inside the mansion, Donovan Kingsley sat silently in his wheelchair, deep in thought. The events of the previous day had finally pushed him to a decision. For weeks, he had watched Sophia slowly reveal her true nature. He had endured the insults, the humiliation, the betrayal. First, it had been painful, but eventually the pain turned into clarity. The test he had created had served its purpose. Sophia had failed completely, and Donovan was no longer interested in pretending to be powerless. This morning, the truth would begin to unfold. Donovan looked down at the phone in his hand. He had been staring at the screen for several minutes, thinking carefully. Once he made this call, everything would change. The test would end. Sophia's world would collapse, and the woman who believed she had been mocking a helpless man would suddenly realize the truth. Donovan finally pressed the call button. The line rang only once. "Good morning, sir." Marcus's calm voice answered immediately. Marcus had been Donovan's most trusted assistant for nearly a decade. While the world believed Donovan had lost control of his empire, Marcus had secretly been managing everything behind the scenes. "Good morning, Marcus," Donovan replied quietly. "Is everything all right?" Donovan glanced toward the staircase. The house was still quiet. "Yeah," he said calmly. "The test is over." Marcus paused briefly. "I see." Donovan could almost hear the understanding in his assistant's voice. "So, it didn't go well," Marcus said gently. Donovan let out a slow breath. "Not even close." Marcus remained silent for a moment. "I'm sorry, sir." Donovan shrugged slightly, even though Marcus couldn't see him. "It's better to know the truth now than after a wedding." "That's true," Marcus replied. Donovan leaned back in the wheelchair. "I want everything ready today." "You mean the reveal?" "Yes." Marcus's tone became serious. "I'll inform the lawyers and the executive team immediately." Donovan nodded. "Bring the documents and the cars." Marcus understood instantly. "Understood, sir." Donovan ended the call. For a moment, he sat quietly, staring out the window. Today, the mask would come off. Today, Sophia would finally see the truth. The house remained quiet for another hour. Then, the familiar sound of high heels echoed from the staircase. Sophia appeared in the living room, wearing an elegant silk dress. She looked refreshed and cheerful, very different from the irritated woman Donovan had grown used to seeing. Donovan noticed immediately. Something had changed in her mood. "Good morning," she said casually as she walked past him. Donovan looked at her. "Good morning." Sophia stopped near the mirror and adjusted her hair. "You look unusually calm today," she said. Donovan smiled slightly. "Do I?" "Yes." She turned to face him. "Did something good happen?" Donovan's smile remained steady. "Something like that." Sophia shrugged. "Well, that's nice." She grabbed her phone from the table. "I'm going out later today with Damon," Donovan asked calmly. Sophia froze for a moment, then she rolled her eyes. "Of course." Donovan simply nodded. "I figured." Sophia looked slightly annoyed. "Donovan, you've been acting strange lately." "How so?" "You're too calm." Donovan chuckled quietly. "I thought you preferred calm." Sophia sighed. "Whatever." She walked toward the kitchen. Just then, the doorbell rang. Sophia frowned. "Who's that?" Donovan glanced toward the door. "Probably visitors." Sophia looked confused. "Visitors?" Lila walked from the hallway toward the door. "I'll check, ma'am." When she opened the door, she gasped slightly. Outside the mansion stood several men in dark suits. Behind them, 3 black luxury cars were parked neatly along the driveway. Lila looked confused. "Good morning," one of the men said politely. "We're here to see Mr. Donovan Kingsley." Lila hesitated. "Please come in." Sophia walked into the living room just as the men entered. Her eyes widened. "What's going on?" The men nodded respectfully toward Donovan. "Good morning, sir." Sophia looked from them to Donovan. "What is this?" Donovan remained calm. "Business." Sophia frowned. "Business?" One of the men stepped forward and placed a briefcase on the table. "We brought the documents you requested." Sophia stared at the scene in confusion. "Donovan, What documents? Donovan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly placed his hands on the arms of the wheelchair. Then something happened that made the entire room freeze. Donovan stood up. Sophia's eyes widened in pure shock. The glass she was holding slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. What? Her voice echoed through the mansion. You can walk? Lila gasped quietly near the doorway. The men in suits simply watched calmly. Donovan stretched his legs slowly, as if he had been sitting too long. Then he turned to face Sophia. Yes, he said calmly. I can. Sophia staggered backward. But the accident. Donovan's expression turned cold. There was no accident. The room fell silent. Sophia's face went pale. You're lying. Donovan shook his head. No. He stepped closer. I was never crippled. Sophia's entire body began trembling. But the hospital, the actors, Donovan replied calmly. The medical reports, fabricated. The news, controlled. Sophia stared at him as if she had seen a ghost. You're saying all of this was fake? Donovan nodded. Yes. Lila stood frozen near the doorway, trying to process what she was hearing. Sophia's voice became shaky. Why? Donovan looked directly into her eyes. To test you. The words hit her like a thunderbolt. Test me? Yes. Donovan's voice carried a quiet authority. I needed to know whether the woman I planned to marry loved me. He paused. Or my money. The words echoed through the large living room. Sophia's breathing became uneven. You faked an accident just to test me? Donovan nodded slowly. Yes. Sophia laughed suddenly, but the laugh sounded nervous, unstable. That's insane. Donovan remained silent. You lied to everyone, she continued. You made the whole world believe you were crippled. Donovan shrugged slightly. That was necessary. Sophia's eyes filled with anger. Necessary? Yes, to see who would stay beside me when everything seemed lost. Sophia's voice grew louder. And you think this proves something? Donovan looked directly into her eyes. It proves everything. The room became quiet again. Sophia stared at him, waiting for something. Perhaps forgiveness. Perhaps an explanation that would somehow make this situation better. But Donovan's expression remained firm. You failed the test, Sophia. The words hit her like a slap. Her mouth opened slowly. Failed. Donovan turned slightly and gestured toward the lawyers. One of them stepped forward and placed a stack of documents on the table. These are the records of the past few weeks, the lawyer explained calmly. Sophia looked confused. What records? Donovan spoke again. The security cameras in this house never stopped recording. Sophia's stomach dropped. Donovan continued calmly. Every conversation, every visit, every moment. Sophia felt her legs weaken. No. Yes. Donovan's voice was quiet but merciless. I saw everything. Sophia's mind raced. The kisses, the insults, the laughter. Damon. The realization struck her like lightning. You were watching. Donovan nodded. Every day. Sophia's breathing became rapid. You tricked me. Donovan raised an eyebrow. No, I revealed the truth. Sophia stepped closer to him. You manipulated everything. Donovan didn't move. All I did was remove the money. Sophia's voice cracked. You made yourself look helpless. And you showed me exactly how you treat someone you believe is helpless. Sophia's hands began shaking. You don't understand. Donovan's eyes hardened. Oh, I understand perfectly. He turned slightly toward the men standing nearby. Tell her. Marcus stepped forward calmly. Miss Sophia, during the past few weeks, Mr. Kingsley's companies have continued operating normally. Sophia looked confused. What do you mean? Marcus spoke clearly. Mr. Kingsley did not lose his wealth. The reports about frozen assets were false. Sophia felt the ground shift beneath her. You're saying? Yes, Marcus replied. Mr. Kingsley is still one of the richest men in the country. The words hit her like a wave. Sophia's eyes widened in horror. The man she had mocked, the man she had betrayed, the man she had cheated on was still the same billionaire she had always admired. And now she had destroyed everything. Sophia suddenly dropped to her knees. Donovan, please! Her voice broke. I made a mistake. Donovan looked down at her without emotion. A mistake? Yes. She grabbed his hand desperately. I didn't mean any of it. Donovan slowly pulled his hand away. You brought another man into my house. Sophia shook her head wildly. That was nothing. You kissed him. It didn't mean anything. You laughed while he mocked me. Sophia's tears streamed down her face. I was confused. Donovan's voice became colder. You called me useless. Sophia buried her face in her hands. I didn't mean it. Donovan shook his head slowly. You said you would never marry a... Sophia's lips trembled. I didn't know. Donovan interrupted her. You said I was depressing. Sophia sobbed harder. Please. You said you would never marry a cripple. Sophia's shoulders trembled uncontrollably. I was angry. Donovan took a deep breath. For weeks, you treated me like a burden. Sophia finally looked up again. Her voice was almost a whisper. I was scared, Donovan. Donovan raised an eyebrow. Scared? Yes. Sophia struggled to stand, using the nearby table for support. Her legs were shaking. I thought everything was gone. My future, the life we planned, everything. She continued. I didn't know how to handle it. Donovan watched her quietly. So, you replaced me? Sophia's lips trembled. No. Yes. Donovan's voice was final. You replaced me with the first man who walked through the door. Sophia looked toward the floor, unable to meet his eyes. For a moment, the room was silent, except for the sound of her uneven breathing. Finally, she spoke again. Donovan, please. Her voice was barely audible. I still love you. Donovan stared at her. For a brief moment, the room felt like it was holding its breath. Then he shook his head. No. The word was simple, but final. Sophia's knees gave out again. She collapsed back onto the floor. You can't mean that. Donovan's face remained calm. I do. Sophia looked around desperately at the men standing nearby. Someone say something. No one moved. No one spoke. Marcus stepped forward slightly, but only to stand beside Donovan. Sophia turned back toward Donovan. You're throwing everything away because of one mistake. Donovan's expression hardened. One mistake. He gestured toward the staircase. You slept in the same bed with another man while I was in this house. Sophia gasped. That's not what happened. Donovan raised an eyebrow. The cameras disagree. Sophia's heart dropped. The cameras. She had forgotten about the cameras. Every moment, every kiss, every laugh, all recorded. Her voice broke completely. Donovan, please don't humiliate me like this. Donovan looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly. You humiliated yourself. The word shattered the last bit of hope Sophia had been holding. Her crying became uncontrollable now. I'm begging you. Donovan turned toward the security guard standing near the door. Escort her out. Sophia's head snapped up. What? Donovan didn't look at her again. She no longer belongs here. Sophia quickly stood up and rushed toward him. No! She grabbed his arm desperately. You can't throw me out. Donovan slowly removed her hand. I just did. Sophia's voice turned desperate. Donovan, please, where will I go? Donovan's face showed no emotion. That is no longer my concern. The guard stepped forward. Ma'am, please come with us. Sophia backed away. No. She looked toward Lila suddenly. Lila. Lila froze. Sophia rushed toward her. Tell him to stop this. Lila looked shocked. You saw everything. Sophia cried. You know I didn't mean it. Lila's heart pounded. She felt sympathy for Sophia's pain, but she also remembered every cruel word Sophia had spoken, every insult, every humiliation. Lila lowered her eyes slightly. I'm sorry, ma'am. Sophia stared at her in disbelief. You too. Lila said nothing. The guards gently grabbed Sophia's arms. Ma'am, please. Sophia struggled briefly, but the fight had already left her. Tears continued pouring down her face as they guided her toward the door. Just before reaching the entrance, she turned back one last time. Her eyes locked onto Donovan. You'll regret this, she cried. Donovan didn't respond. You think that maid cares about you? Lila felt her heart stop for a moment. Sophia pointed toward her angrily. She's just pretending. Donovan remained calm. Sophia's voice became bitter. One day she'll betray you too. Donovan finally spoke. "That's enough." The guards opened the door. Sophia was led outside. Her crying echoed across the driveway as they escorted her toward the gate. Then the door closed. The sound echoed through the mansion like the final chapter of a long story ending. Silence filled the room once again. Donovan stood still for a moment. Then he let out a slow breath. The test was finally over. Marcus stepped closer. "Are you all right, sir?" Donovan nodded slowly. "Yes." Marcus studied his face carefully. "You made the right decision." Donovan looked toward the doorway where Sophia had stood only moments before. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know." Across the room, Lila remained standing silently, unsure of what to say. The man she had cared for all this time, the man she believed was helpless, had just revealed himself to be someone completely different, and she wasn't sure how to feel. Donovan finally turned toward her. Their eyes met across the room. For the first time since the truth was revealed, neither of them spoke, but something had already begun to change between them, because sometimes the end of one story is the beginning of another. The Kingsley mansion looked completely different. Music filled the garden. Beautiful decorations covered the trees. White flowers lined the walkway leading toward the large wedding stage. Guests from across the country had gathered to witness the celebration. Business leaders, politicians, friends. Everyone had come to attend the wedding of Donovan Kingsley, but the bride was not the elegant socialite many expected. Instead, she was a young woman wearing a simple but beautiful white dress. Lila, the maid who had once quietly cleaned the floors of the mansion, now walked gracefully down the aisle. The guests whispered among themselves in amazement. But Donovan didn't hear them. His eyes were focused only on Lila. When she reached him, "My," he smiled warmly. "You look beautiful." Lila laughed softly. "You're completely biased." The officiant began the ceremony. As they exchanged vows, Donovan spoke quietly to her. "You loved me when you thought I had nothing." Lila smiled gently. "And I would have loved you even if that had been true." Donovan held her hands. "For the first time in my life, I know what real love looks like." Lila's eyes sparkled. "And what does it look like?" Donovan smiled. "It looks like kindness." The guests applauded as they exchanged rings. The former maid, who had once quietly served meals in the kitchen, officially became the wife of one of the most powerful billionaires in the country. But more importantly, she became the woman who had proven that true love is not measured by wealth. It is revealed by how someone treats you when the world believes you have nothing.